You know that feeling when you hold your breath, hoping today might finally be different? That maybe, just maybe, they'll remember how much you've done. That you're not just there, but that you matter. That's how I felt when my son Derrick called. After 6 months of silence, no birthdays, no holidays, no "Hi, Mom," he suddenly asked me to dinner at Bellé's, a place I couldn't even afford to peek into. I should have known this wasn't going to be a happy evening, but hope's the last thing a mother lets go of. It had been exactly 196 days since I last saw Derrick. Yes, I counted. Every day, I checked my phone, reread our old texts, even whispered his name at night like it might echo back through the walls of this too-quiet house. So when he called that Friday morning and said, "Mom, why don't we get dinner tonight?" I didn't ask questions. I smiled so hard my jaw ached and said yes before he finished the sentence. I didn't even think about where. Not until he said, "Bellé's." I nearly dropped the phone. Bellé's wasn't just a restaurant. It was where people wore shoes that cost more than my car. But if that's where Derrick wanted to meet, then that's where I'd go. I spent the next 4 hours getting ready. I ironed the navy blue dress I'd worn to Robert's funeral, the only dress I owned that felt special. Brushed my hair 5 times longer than usual, and for the first time in years, I put on the pearl necklace Robert had given me for our 25th anniversary. Then, on a whim, I opened the bottom drawer of the old chest and pulled out a small leather photo album. It had Derrick's entire childhood inside. Sticky finger smiles, first day of school, his high school graduation where I cheered so loud people turned to stare. I tucked the album into my purse. Maybe over dessert we'd look through it together. Maybe this dinner was a turning point, a peace offering, a new chapter. I told myself, "Don't be silly, Margaret. He's reaching out. He's trying. Meet him halfway." As I stepped into Bellé's, I almost turned right back around. The gold chandeliers, the smell of truffle butter and crisp linens. Everyone was dressed like they'd stepped out of a magazine. And then there was me, 70, alone, holding a purse too big and hope too fragile. But then I saw Derrick at a table by the window, his back straight, suit sharp, and beside him, Harper, his wife. Harper didn't smile when she saw me, didn't even stand up, just gave a little flick of her hand like, "Sit, let's get this over with." I smiled anyway, because that's what mothers do. "Hello, sweetheart," I said, placing a gentle hand on Derrick's shoulder. He flinched. Not a lot, but enough that I felt it. Still, I sat down. I wouldn't ruin this moment. Wouldn't let my nerves win. "How are the kids?" I asked, forcing cheer into my voice. "They're fine," Harper said flatly, still scrolling on her phone. I looked at Derrick. He glanced at his watch. Twice. Something was off. I felt it in my bones, but I kept smiling. Because when you're a mother, especially one who's had to rebuild herself from grief and silence, you learn to smile through everything, through debt, through being left behind, through having your only son look at you like you're in the way. Still, I tried. I always tried. "I brought something," I said, reaching into my purse. "It's for Emma's birthday next week." I pulled out a little wrapped box. Inside was a charm bracelet. Nothing fancy, but I'd had the charms engraved with tiny letters. EMMA. I thought Harper might smile, or at least say thank you. She didn't. Instead, she looked at Derrick and said, "Didn't we already tell her?" "Harper," he began. "No, I'm tired of pretending." She looked straight at me. "Emma doesn't need your cheap trinkets, Bessie." That wasn't my name. She knew it. Everyone knew it. I opened my mouth, stunned. Harper kept going. "Stop trying to buy their love. You weren't a great mother, Margaret. Let's not rewrite history." That was when Derrick, my son, the boy I raised alone after Robert died, finally looked at me. But there was no warmth in his eyes, no hesitation. He grabbed the bread plate off the table and slammed it onto the floor with such force the entire restaurant went silent. "You should have stayed home," he said, voice low, angry. People stared. One woman gasped. A waiter froze mid-step. And me? I just sat there, too stunned to cry, too shattered to speak. I looked down at the porcelain pieces scattered across the floor and thought, that's me. That's my motherhood, in shards, in silence. That night, I sat on my front porch for hours, holding the photo album I never opened at the restaurant. The stars above didn't twinkle. They stared. I flipped through page baby Derrick with mashed peas on his cheeks, Derrick in his cap and gown, Derrick holding Emma for the first time. I had given up everything for that boy, worked double shifts, skipped meals, sold my wedding ring to pay for his first semester at college. I built him a life brick by brick, quietly. And now I was the one who didn't belong? This wasn't just a sad dinner. This was the beginning of a revenge story. But not the loud, bitter kind. Mine would be silent, soft, dignified, because I didn't need to scream to be heard. I just needed to remember. They may have forgotten what I gave, but I haven't. I didn't sleep that night, not because I was angry, not even because I was heartbroken. I was erased. I sat in Robert's old recliner, a faded quilt pulled over my lap, flipping through photo albums that once felt like treasures. Now they felt like evidence of something that no longer existed. In the silence, I kept replaying Derrick's voice at the restaurant. "You should have stayed home." He didn't raise his voice. That's what haunts me. It wasn't rage. It was dismissal. Like I was an interruption in a life that no longer had space for me. How did I become that? How did we get here? The next morning, the house felt heavier somehow. Sunlight poured through the windows, but it felt cold. I shuffled into the kitchen, set the kettle on the stove, and stared at it without turning on the heat. I thought of Emma, my granddaughter. She was only 7 the last time I saw her. She had drawn me a picture of a purple giraffe and said, "Grandma, you're the only person who knows how to make my grilled cheese just right." And now, I wasn't even allowed to give her a birthday gift. When Derrick was little, he had asthma. I used to sleep sitting up in a rocking chair just to keep him upright through the night. I still remember the feeling of his tiny chest rising and falling on mine. I remember telling myself, this boy is my life. As long as he's okay, I'll be okay. That used to be enough. It's strange how a moment, just a few words, a broken plate, silence from your own child, can undo a lifetime of love. And maybe that's what hurt the most. It wasn't just the insult. It wasn't just the embarrassment. It was the realization that I wasn't welcome in their lives anymore. Not just unwanted, unnecessary. Later that afternoon, I stood at the edge of my garden, what used to be Robert's pride and joy, and watched as leaves swirled across the path. I saw the little handprints Derrick had pressed into the concrete when we poured the walkway. I used to touch them with my fingertips when I missed him. Now I couldn't bear to look. That's when I heard myself whisper out loud, maybe I was too much. Maybe I was controlling. I hate how quickly I believed that. To anyone watching this who's ever been called too much, too involved, too emotional, too present, maybe you've had that moment too, where the people you love the most rewrite history in front of your eyes, and suddenly everything you gave becomes something they resent. If you felt that, like your love became the burden they say they had to grow out of, you're not alone. Drop A if this has ever been your story too. I'd love to know. I'm not the only one who feels this. That evening, I made myself a cup of tea I didn't drink. I reheated leftover soup and let it grow cold again. The house echoed. I had built a life around being needed. Now I was watching that role dissolve, and I didn't know who I was without it. Around 9 p.m., I got up and walked into the room that used to be Derrick's. It still had the same faded posters on the walls, his childhood bookshelf, trophies I'd cleaned 100 times. I sat on the edge of his old bed and stared at the ceiling. There were no calls, no apologies, just the silence that creeps in when someone makes you feel like a ghost in your own story. The next morning, I finally did something I hadn't done in a very long time. I opened the fireproof box Robert and I used to keep tucked away in our closet. Inside were bank statements, property deeds, trust documents. I had almost forgotten just how much was there. And sitting at the very top, folded neatly in a labeled envelope, was the deed to the house Derrick thought he owned. No, I didn't hold it out of spite. I'd bought the house through our company years ago when Derrick was struggling, but too proud to accept help. He thought it was a miracle deal from a motivated seller. He never knew it was me. I kept it quiet to protect his dignity, but maybe all that secrecy had only made things worse. Right below the deed was something else I'd tucked away, a manila folder of photos and notes. They were given to me, quietly, by an old friend who worked at a hotel downtown. Harper had been seen there several times with a man who was not Derrick. Nothing explosive, no drama, just cold, quiet betrayal. I'd buried those photos deep in the box and deeper in my heart because I didn't want to hurt my son, because I thought, if I said nothing, maybe the cracks wouldn't break the whole foundation. Now I wondered if that silence only made it easier for them to leave me behind. I closed the box, took a long breath, and then I made a decision. No more sitting in this house waiting to be remembered. No more pretending love means letting people step over you. I would call James, the same lawyer who helped Robert and me set up the company decades ago, not to seek revenge, but to finally stop hiding behind the idea that love means never making anyone uncomfortable, because I was uncomfortable. I was in pain, and that kind of pain doesn't go away by staying quiet. There's a moment when the grief shifts. It doesn't happen like a thunderclap or a sudden storm. It's quieter, slower, like a curtain closing on a play where you never got to say your last line. For me, it happened the morning after I called James, our old family lawyer. I didn't cry that day, not because I wasn't hurting, God knows I was, but because I crossed some invisible line between sadness and clarity. The tears had done their job. Now came the silence. I walked through the house barefoot, the old wood floors creaking beneath my steps, and I felt it. The absence. Not just of noise, but of meaning. This was the house where Derrick took his first steps, where Robert used to leave notes in my lunchbox, where I once stayed up until 3 a.m. sewing a Halloween costume with one working light bulb and no heat because Derrick had changed his mind the night before. And now, it felt like a museum of someone else's memories. I paused at the hallway mirror. My reflection stared back. A woman who had built a family with her bare hands, only to be left standing in the ruins without explanation. When Derrick was born, I made a promise to myself. No matter what happens, I will be his home. And I was, even after Robert died, even when money was tight, even when he told me he didn't need help. But I helped anyway. I paid off the last of his student loans. I covered Emma's preschool tuition when Harper claimed they'd lost the paperwork. I sent grocery money during the pandemic, pretending it was just a little gift. And I never said a word, because love, to me, was silent. But now I wondered, was it too silent? The phone didn't ring that weekend. There were no texts, no follow-up from Derrick, no, I'm sorry, not even a question about the plate he shattered at the restaurant. I kept checking my phone anyway. We do that, don't we? Even when we know they've moved on, even when we've been erased. We keep hoping they'll remember who we are. On Sunday night, I found myself standing in Derrick's old room again. Everything was just as he'd left it, right down to the dusty baseball glove on the shelf. I sat on the bed and whispered, I was a good mother. I was. I needed to say it out loud, not because I doubted it, but because I had spent so long letting everyone else narrate my story for me. And lately, all I'd heard was Harper's voice echoing in my head. You weren't a great mother, Margaret. As if decades of sacrifice could be wiped clean with one careless sentence. The next morning, James called. His voice, always calm and professional, held a new kind of weight. Margaret, are you sure about this? Yes, I said without hesitation. He'd drawn up 2 documents, a formal freeze on the joint card Harper had been using for 5 years, a certified notice informing Derrick that the house he lived in was, and always had been, legally mine. I signed them both before noon. No drama, no anger, just paperwork, just truth. Later that day, I sat with the manila folder again, the one with the hotel photos. Harper in a red dress, leaning too close to a man who wasn't Derrick. Harper checking in under a different name. Harper smiling in ways I hadn't seen her smile around family in years. I could have sent them to Derrick then and there, but I didn't. Not yet. This wasn't revenge. This wasn't about winning. This was about no longer pretending. That night, I cooked dinner for one and ate at the kitchen table in full silence. I looked at the empty seat across from me and imagined Emma sitting there again, swinging her legs, asking me why broccoli had tiny trees. Would she even remember me in 10 years? Would I be the grandma who disappeared quietly because her son decided she didn't fit the image anymore? I couldn't sleep. Again. So I walked outside and sat on the porch with a blanket over my shoulders. The stars were bright, clear. I used to love nights like this. Robert and I would drink tea and talk about everything we were building, our company, our future, our son. Now, all that was left was what I hadn't said. The protection I offered without being asked. The money I gave without being thanked. The loyalty I kept, even when they forgot I was part of this family. That's the thing about loss. Not the loud kind that comes with funerals or endings, but the kind where you're still alive, still there, and they just stop seeing you. That's what this chapter of my life was. An invisible goodbye. They didn't bury me. They just forgot I was here. But I remembered, and that was enough to start again. I didn't expect the letter to reach them that fast, but it did. Monday morning around 10 a.m., while I was pruning the dead lavender from the garden, James called to say both letters had been delivered and signed for. I didn't say anything at first. I just stood there, secateurs in hand, watching a bee hover over the last purple bloom. "I can still cancel the account action if you want," James said, gently. "No," I replied. "It's time." I wasn't angry anymore. What I felt was something deeper, a kind of steady, humming truth. For too long, I'd mistaken love for silence. Thought if I didn't speak up, if I kept giving, kept covering, kept forgiving, it would eventually be enough for them to remember who I was. But here's what I've learned about invisibility. The longer you allow it, the more natural it becomes. For them, not for you. That afternoon, I poured myself a cup of tea and sat at the kitchen table. The house was still, the kind of stillness that's not empty, but waiting. I thought about the last 10 years, all the loans I'd forgiven, all the holidays I spent alone, making excuses to neighbors, all the family photos I wasn't in, because I couldn't make it when I hadn't been invited. It hit me then. I'd been protecting a lie. And I wasn't just lying to Derrick or Harper. I was lying to myself. That night, my phone rang. Derrick's name flashed across the screen. I stared at it for a moment, heart pounding like I was 20 again. I didn't answer right away. I wanted to breathe first, make sure I wouldn't slip back into old patterns. Finally, I picked up. "Mom," he said without preamble, "what the hell is going on?" His voice was clipped, irritated, like I'd canceled a magazine subscription, not his wife's spending account. "She got a letter," he continued, "saying you froze her card, that you froze it, and that the house, we've been paying that mortgage for 7 years, and now you're saying it's not even ours." "Yes," I said calmly. "That's correct." There was a pause. I could hear him breathing on the other end. Could picture him running his hand through his hair, just like Robert used to. "You're doing this because of the dinner, aren't you?" "No," I said. "I'm doing this because it's time for the truth." We were quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "This is exactly what Harper meant. You're still trying to control everything." Those words used to crush me. Now they just bounced off. "I'm not trying to control anything, Derrick. I'm simply done pretending I don't exist." He came by that evening, didn't even knock, just barged in like he still lived here. His face was flushed with anger, jaw tight. He threw a folder on the table. "Prove it." So I did. I laid out the paperwork, the deed to their house, the bank statements showing my monthly gifts, the education fund I set up for Emma, the tax returns that listed me, not him, as the majority shareholder in our family business. He looked through them with shaking hands, flipping pages like they might change if he read fast enough. "I don't understand," he said finally. Why didn't you tell me?" I folded my hands and said the one thing I hadn't let myself say in years, because every time I offered help, you pushed me away. So I found ways to help without making you feel small. He sat back in the chair, stunned. "I wasn't trying to punish you," I added. "I just couldn't let you keep treating me like a burden while living off the life I built." I thought he might yell. Instead, he went quiet, a long, heavy kind of quiet. "Does Harper know all this?" he asked, voice small. "She got the letter, but no, she doesn't know everything." He stared at the table, then whispered, "I think I've made a mistake." It wasn't an apology, but it was something. After he left, I stood at the front door for a long time, watching the empty street, letting the weight of it settle in. I wasn't sure if Derrick would come back, but for the first time in a long time, that didn't scare me. I sat down that night with my journal and wrote a single line. Love without self-respect isn't love. It's quiet erasure. If you're watching this and you've ever felt like you had to shrink to stay in someone's life, if you've ever made yourself smaller, softer, quieter, just to be tolerated, let me remind you, you're allowed to take up space. You're allowed to be remembered. You don't have to disappear to be loved. 2 days passed before I heard from Derrick again. I wasn't waiting. Not like before. I still made tea in the morning, still walked through the garden in the evening snipping faded rose heads, still sat in Robert's old chair with my book, even if I read the same page 3 times before giving up. But I wasn't waiting. There's a difference. On the 3rd day, the doorbell rang. I opened the door and there he was, standing on the porch, alone. No anger this time, no folder of documents, just Derrick, looking 10 years older than he had a week ago. "I need to talk," he said. I stepped aside and let him in. We sat at the kitchen table like we hadn't done in years. I poured 2 cups of coffee and he stirred his twice before speaking. "She's been lying to me," he said, "for a long time. I found things, bank accounts, receipts, messages." I didn't say anything. I let the silence hold him. "She was planning to leave me, take the kids, move to Miami with someone else." His voice cracked. "She's been funneling money into a private account for years." I reached across the table, gently placed my hand over his. He didn't pull away. "I was so sure I had everything under control," he said, "and all this time I didn't even know where the money came from or who was really holding our life together. I could have said, 'I did it for you.' But instead, I just said, 'You weren't alone, even when you thought you were.'" That night, after Derrick left, I didn't cry. I didn't pace or replay every word. I just folded the laundry and watched the evening news. I sat in the stillness, not because I was lonely, but because for the first time in years, I didn't feel like a ghost in my own house. The next morning, I called James. "I want to go public," I told him. He chuckled. "With what, your secret empire?" "With my name," I said. "No more hiding behind Robert's initials. No more pretending I'm not the one who rebuilt the business after he died." There was a long pause. Then James said softly, "Margaret, it's about time." That week, I had my first meeting with the board at Elridge Property Group, as me, not as the widow, not as the silent partner, as Margaret Elridge, founder, CEO. Their eyes widened when I walked in. Some were surprised, some were impressed, but none of them dismissed me, because I wasn't asking for space anymore. I was taking it. I started waking up earlier, not to worry about Derrick, not to check if the kids might call, just to walk, to breathe, to exist on my own terms. I even bought new curtains for the living room, bright yellow ones, the kind Robert would have teased me about. But when the sun poured through them, the house felt warm in a way it hadn't in years. One afternoon, I ran into Martha, my oldest friend, outside the grocery store. "You look different," she said, "lighter." "I think I am," I said. We talked for an hour by the carrots. I told her everything, about the house, the money, the betrayal, the documents, the truth. At one point, she stopped me and said, "Margaret, you don't sound angry. You sound free." And she was right. The next weekend, I hosted my first dinner in 5 years. Nothing fancy, just Martha, a couple of old friends, some good wine, and baked salmon with lemon butter. The house was filled with laughter again. the kind that doesn't ask for permission, the kind that doesn't feel like it's competing with sorrow. After the guests left, I stood in the doorway and took in the quiet. It wasn't the aching kind. It was the kind that comes when you know, deep in your bones, that you finally stopped waiting for someone else to give your life meaning. I didn't stop loving Derrick, but I stopped trying to earn his love. Stopped proving, begging, softening just to stay in his orbit. He'd have to meet me where I stood now, whole and unbent. That Sunday, he came by again, this time with Emma and Jacob. The kids ran through the front door like they never left. "Grandma, be me!" Emma shouted, holding up a drawing. "Look, I made this at school." It was a picture of a house with me standing in front of it, watering flowers. The sun had a face. I was smiling. I framed it that night and put it on the mantle. That's the thing about quiet rebirth. It doesn't start with applause. It starts with a whisper inside yourself that says, "I'm still here, and I still matter." The house is quieter these days, not in a lonely way, not in the echoing, hollow kind of silence I used to live with. It's the kind of quiet that comes from peace. Derrick still visits, sometimes with the kids, sometimes alone. He doesn't say much, not about the past, not about Harper, but his eyes have changed. They carry the weight of knowing and the beginnings of remorse. I've learned not to expect the words I once longed for. I may never hear "thank you" or "I'm sorry" in the ways I used to dream of, but that's not what matters now. What matters is that he sees me again, not as a burden, not as background noise, but as someone who never truly left. Harper is gone. She left quietly, like I always knew she would. The divorce is in process. The custody agreement is being drafted. There are still lawyers and papers and meetings. But that's Derrick's road to walk now, not mine. Last week, he showed up at my door with a manila envelope. Inside was a copy of his new will. He's naming me as legal guardian if anything happens to him. "I want the kids to be raised by someone who actually cares about them," he said, voice low. I didn't cry. I just reached out and touched his hand. That was enough. One evening, after Emma and Jacob had fallen asleep on my couch, Derrick and I sat on the porch drinking tea. The yard was lit by fireflies, just like when he was a boy. "I used to think you were overbearing," he said quietly. "I know," I replied. He hesitated. "But now I understand. You weren't trying to control my life. You were trying to hold it together." I looked at him, and for the first time, I saw something familiar. Not the angry man from the restaurant, not the son who broke me with silence, but the little boy who once trusted me to fix scraped knees and broken toys. "I was never perfect," I said. "No," he replied, "but you never gave up, not even when I did." I didn't need more than that. No dramatic apology, no parade, just that one line. That quiet moment where truth finally took its rightful place at the table. A few weeks later, I made a final visit to James's office. "I want to finalize the new will," I told him. It left the house I live in, not to Derrick, but to Emma, along with a note in my handwriting that read, "May this place remind you that love is quiet, but it never disappears." It was never about punishment. It was about planting something for the future. On a Saturday afternoon, I hosted a small garden party. Just a few old friends, some lemon cake, soft music. Emma helped me set the table. Jacob chased butterflies barefoot. Derrick stood under the maple tree, arms crossed, watching it all unfold. He looked out of place at first, but then he laughed, really laughed, as Jacob shrieked, running through the sprinkler. It was the kind of laugh that makes the air lighter. He came to stand beside me. "Your garden looks beautiful," I smiled. "It always did. You just couldn't see it before." That night, after they'd gone, I stood in the doorway and looked out at the yard. Fireflies again. Same as always, but this time I didn't feel like I was watching life from a distance. I felt in it. Present. Seen. They say some stories end with triumph. This one doesn't. It ends with recognition. A slow, quiet one. The kind that doesn't make headlines, but makes a heart whole again. I didn't win back a perfect family. But I did win something better. The right to stop apologizing for loving too much. The space to be remembered without having to scream. The peace of knowing I never disappeared. They just finally looked up. And that was enough. To you watching this, if you've ever given more than you received, if you've ever been told you were too much when all you did was love, if you've ever been erased in silence and still stayed kind, then I hope this story reminded you of something. Your love was never the problem. Your presence is not a burden, and your story isn't over. I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Was there ever a time you realized your worth after someone forgot it? Even just typing, "I see myself in this," might help someone else feel less invisible. Thank you for watching. And remember, quiet doesn't mean weak. It means you've chosen strength without noise.